The biggest challenge was the stability of the operation because the situation was changing always continuously, always blackouts and hacker attack. And we managed to adapt ourselves very fast because we introduced a reserve power supply and cyber security.
Jenny, it's great meeting you today. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me. For those who have not met you, can you just briefly tell us who you are and what you do?
I'm Evgeny, I'm a Director General of IPay.ua, and we are one of the big financial payment provider in Ukraine. So we develop innovative payment solutions, and they help people and businesses and consumers to make payments. And my role is strategic development of the company, and also growing in the ecosystem and the introduction of new technologies. And we want iPay to be the leader of digital payments, even in difficult conditions.
All right. Now, help me understand, Evgeny. What is the core value proposition of the company, and how does iPay differentiate itself from other payment providers in the industry?
The core value is faster, reliable, and very convenient transactions. And we are specialized in the QR and the internet payments. And we introduced multi-acquiring, which allows to integrate many banks into one terminal. So now we have a war in Ukraine, and the stability is not as it was before. And with our solutions, vendors can work without any interruptions. The cost per transaction is lower with us than the other payment providers.
Okay, Evgeny. Now, we are all aware of the difficult situation that is being lived in Ukraine at the moment as a result of the war. What I'd like to understand is what are the steps that iPay has taken in order to ensure that it can continue to operate and provide services to its customers in spite of the difficult circumstances that Ukraine finds itself in at the moment?
The war created a lot of challenges. We were able to adapt and we improved our infrastructure, and we can continue without any interruption, even in case of blackouts. We are in very close contact with partners and banks, and we introduced together very reliable power systems. And we introduced alternative ways of payment that allows clients to make payments even in difficult conditions.
Right. Now, Evgeny, as the general manager of iPay, I assume that you had to make some tough decisions as soon as the war broke out. Can you walk me a little bit through what were the strategic decisions that you had to take at the beginning of the war to ensure continuity for your services?
The biggest challenge was the stability of the operation because the situation was changing always continuously, always blackouts and hacker attack. And we managed to adapt ourselves very fast because we introduced a reserve power supply and cyber security. And another challenge is the support of the team because the team is now all over the world, and we always on the contact with them. And it was impossible to imagine that every morning we would ask each other, how are you doing now? How did you live this night until now? And we shift people from one place to another where they will stay in the safest way. At the same time, we maintain the efficiency of our operation. It was a really big challenge.
Yeah, Evgeny, I can only imagine the challenges and the risks involved in some of the decisions that you had to make at the very beginning of the war. Now, I would like to ask you about innovation. So help me understand, how has the war impacted the rate at which payments have continued to innovate in Ukraine?
We would never say this, but it is like this now. So the war speeded up the digital transformation. And the businesses, they became more flexible because lots of people, they shifted to digital solutions. And we were focused on multi-acquiring in electronic e-commerce and post-acquiring as well. So these solutions, they allow to work 24/7. As I see now, Ukraine became one of the most advanced digital markets as compared to what we see all around. And the companies, they became more open for new technologies. I speak about the sellers, adapt themselves much faster because they understand everything, and if they keep money on bank cards, but the bank cards cannot function everywhere, so they go to find much more efficient solutions.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned earlier that you specialized in QR payments and digital payments. has there been an increase or an acceleration in customer adoption of these type of technologies that has been catalyzed by the war, or how is the adoption of, say, things like QR payments in the lead up to the war and in the past 3 years since the war started?
They had no other way out. Before the war, the Ukrainians' financial inclusivity was at high quite level in Ukraine, but consumers and Ukrainians, they had no any difficulties to just to shift to new digital channels. And today, Ukrainians, they are among 105 top in the world in the sense of understanding the financial technologies and using the technology, and based on statistics of Visa International Payment System.
Now, is there something you can tell me about how the overall ecosystem in Ukraine has come together to weather the current situation? I know, for example, that there was this initiative for power banking that enabled branches to serve banking customers regardless of whether they were a branch customer or a bank customer. So help me understand how has this helped cohesion within the ecosystem?
Financial ecosystem in Ukraine is very strong, and banks and fintech companies and regulators, they work all together. National Bank of Ukraine coordinates the financial system, and we as a fintech company, we work together with banks and the sellers. We introduce flexible financial solutions like QR payments and alternative payment channels. This cooperation between parties is very important. It allows to be adapted to all kinds of new challenges. And the Power Bank was a very cool initiative of the National Bank. It's very important for financial system of Ukraine. And it allows to have this reserve power supply, and the financial system bank and supplies can work without any interruption. Maybe in Europe it's difficult to explain how it can be without power supply for 15-20 hours, but it's what is it now. All the financial system, the banks and fintech companies, they invested huge amounts of money to be independent from power supply and internet provision. It permits to make any POS terminal or just ATM machine work, and all kinds of cash software can work without interruption. It permitted to strengthen enormously the whole system. For me, for example, banks and other fintech companies can be enemies, but we sticking all together, and we were fighting for each other, working all together, and because of this, we became all very strong and very independent.
Yeah, no, it's very inspiring to hear how the ecosystem has basically bundled together and have just expressed solidarity towards the entire system as a result of the current situation. What I'd like to understand as well is how have cross-border payments been affected? Because I imagine that with so many people leaving Ukraine, there must now be quite a substantial demand for payments originated outside of Ukraine to Ukraine, and from Ukraine to outside of Ukraine with remittances and that sort of thing. So what's been the main challenges that IPay has had to face in order to accommodate that increased demand for cross-border payments?
So it's painful for all Ukrainians because of the war, and the National Bank decided to stop money transfers so that the money should stay inside the country. There are some minimum amounts, but they are very, very small. So the families are suffering because they cannot transfer money because the family is outside, and he has to do something in official way.
All right, Evgeny, and then just a last question for you. So as the managing director of IPay, I would love to understand how has your strategic planning and your strategic outlook has changed as a result of the current situation. I imagine that, you know, in a situation where there's not a lot of stability, you need to be able to respond very quickly, and then therefore long-term planning or long-term strategizing might not be an option. So help me understand, how has that changed, and what does your strategy definition process looks like now?
Previously, we were startup, and we were jumping on first possible client, and we were lagging behind of all the leaders 5 years ago tremendously. When COVID started, and then the full-scale invasion, so we had no any other way to do than to be focused on high flow sellers, vendors, and just to generate a big flow of cash. Today we serve the biggest state companies like Ukrainian railways, 10 biggest cities in Ukraine for transportation system, and we were working for many years to provide such services in this field. As of today, there is no other alternative to provide better services. We were focused on security, on the speed of onboard of a client, and on the quality of service, and without this we could not be the leader number one.
Well, Evgeny, thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. It's been really inspiring listening to you, and this is clearly not just a story of business success, but a story of resilience under unimaginably hard, difficult situations. So thanks again for your time and for inspiring us with your story.
Thank you very much, Chris.